نحن على موعد الآن مع كلمة يلقيها الأستاذ مانويل بارانج، مدير عام الأسماك والاستزراع المائي بمنظمة الأغذية والزراعة بالأمم المتحدة. سيتحدث لنا عن التحول الأزرق لتوفير الغذاء للعالم من الأغذية المائية. Manuel, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Thank you for having the opportunity to talk to you again today. I'm going to talk to you about blue transformation to feed the world with aquatic foods. And this follows the presentation of Dr. Ali, the superb presentation that shows how fast Saudi Arabia is moving in that goal of blue transformation. Let me reiterate something I mentioned this morning. The prevalence of undernourishment in the world has been growing over the last 4 or 5 years and has shot up in the last 2 years as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, as you see on your left. At the same time, the price of food, and that is the red line on your graph on the right, the price of food also shot as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have the situation where we have a world with an increasing number of people suffering from hunger, and at the same time when the price of food continues to grow. And this has to change. Now, if you look at the blue line in that figure, this is the price of fish. That's the average index, the price index of fish that FAO computes on a regular basis. So you can see that fish, the price of fish has remained fairly constant over the last 6-7 years, despite the fluctuations in the food price index. So fish not only has a great capability to produce food, actually the price makes it more affordable and more constant and more accessible to the poor than other animal-based proteins. An affordable top protein source, I mentioned a moment ago, it is more affordable than other animal source proteins. It is also very highly bioavailable. That means that the proteins and micronutrients are very easily absorbed by humans compared to other animal proteins and other animal nutrients. It is essential, particularly for lactating mothers and for young children. As it was mentioned in this report, the figure that I put in there, a UN Nutrition report on the role of aquatic foods in sustainable healthy diets that was produced in 2021. Also, it is known here, but in some places it is not, that of the top 30 countries that consume fish, the top 30 fish-consuming nations, 16 of them are what we call food deficit and low-income countries. In other words, fish is food for the poor, and therefore it needs to be protected. Nearly 1 every 5 people in the planet depend on fisheries for their livelihoods. Either they are fishers, they work in the value chains of fisheries, or they are dependent on members of their families that work in fisheries. And something that is very often not understood and appreciated is the large biodiversity that we have in aquatic foods. We capture about 2,500 species of fish and mollusks and crustaceans in the world, and we culture about 600 of them. Compare that with land-based animal production, where we have a handful of species. That diversity allows for better climate change adaptation options because, of course, there are different species that do better in different conditions. Dr. Ali mentioned this already, but I'll repeat. The conversion efficiency of fish is much better than most other animal-based food production systems. Look on your left. This is the conversion efficiency, that's kilograms of feed that you need for a kilogram of live weight that you produce. And that, of course, is cultured fish, because capture fisheries we don't feed. But on average, the conversion efficiency of cultured fish is about 1.2, compared to chicken, pigs, and cattle, which are obviously much larger. So this is a much more effective way of translated feed into flesh. And that is because, well, for 2 main reasons. by living in water, fish needs to invest less energy into skeleton, as opposed to those of us that live outside the water and are subject to gravity to a higher degree, and also because they don't have to regulate the temperature like we do. So metabolically, they are very efficient. They are also very efficient in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. They produce per kilogram or per gram of protein in this figure less greenhouse gas than any other animal food production, and therefore from a climate change perspective is also very efficient. The consumption of fish around the world has grown tremendously in recent decades. On an average in the world, the average consumption was 9 kilograms per person per year in the 1960s. It is now 20 kilograms per person per year. It is much lower in this region, although growing. As you can see from the panel there, the contribution of aquaculture has been so high that now we consume more fish from aquaculture than from capture fisheries globally in the world. And yet, it is a sector that is not sufficiently recognized in food security strategies. In a recent study of 165 public health and nutrition policies around the world, only 68 of them, less than half, mention fish and shellfish as a key objective for the nutrition of their countries. So it's still a lot of work to be done to convince governments to realize the potential of aquatic foods for nutrition and public health. That is why in FAO we started a new program called Blue Transformation, a strategic priority for the next decade that has been agreed by member countries. It started from a request from member countries. FAO organizes every 2 years a committee of fisheries where all the countries of the world come to FAO to discuss priorities. The last committee on fisheries was held in February 2021, and this committee came up with a declaration on sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. A declaration which is available on the web that has three objectives, or does three things. First, recognizes the successes that we have already achieved in fisheries and aquaculture in the last 25 years. Also identifies what priority areas we need to work on to really further transform aquatic foods. And through that, develop a new vision for the sector in the 21st century that brings the sector as part of the solution rather than as part of the problem. Blue Transformation has three very specific objectives. The first objective is to sustainably expand and intensify aquaculture to satisfy global demand for aquatic foods. In some places it is expansion, in some places it is intensification, depending on the local context. There is a very specific target here. By the end of the decade, we want to achieve between 30 and 45% growth in global aquaculture. Saudi Arabia has an even higher target than that, but we would be happy if we achieve a 40% around the world. It is doable, but it is challenging. How do we do that? There are many things to work on. Technological innovation, including feeds, genetic improvement and diversification, better use of that genetic material that we have, improvements in biosecurity and disease control, because the more we expand and intensify aquaculture, the more we are at risk of disease. Regulatory frameworks, that is for the governments, regulatory frameworks that attract investments. Aquaculture, after all, is a business. Those that want to invest in aquaculture need to know what context they operate, what governance systems are there, what trust do they have, so that if they invest, they're going to recoup that investment. And we need, of course, capacity building and extension services throughout the world to make sure that that technology that has been gathered around the world is shared intelligently and for the benefit of humankind. The second objective of Blue Transformation is transform fisheries through better management. It seems like a simple message, but it is not. We need to ensure that 100% of seas, oceans, rivers, lakes, all waterscapes are under effective management. This is the target that we should aim for. That will help restore fish stocks to the levels that produce maximum sustainable yield, MSY. This is an agreed global objective. It is in the UN Law of the Sea, it is in the development goals, it is in all the global agreed principles, the maximum sustainable yield. There's a lot to be done to achieve that. First of all, we need to bring back investment in fisheries sustainability. There has been a significant disinvestment globally on fisheries sustainability in the recent decades. We need to bring money back. Why? Because we need to improve data collection systems. We need to develop management and assessment methods that work in regions that are capacity limited. We need to innovate in the monitoring of the fisheries, in the control systems, in the enforcement of regulations. We need to develop adaptations to climate change. It is one of the areas where climate change is going to impact us the most. I don't know how many here know that 95% of the heat that has been produced as a result of global warming is sitting in the oceans. It's not in the atmosphere, it's not on the land, it's in the oceans. Climate change adaptation is urgent. And finally, we need to make sure that we translate national management into regional management. Recoffy has been mentioned, RAFO has been mentioned. This connection between global governance, regional governance, and national governance is important to achieve the objectives that we all want. And third and last objective of Blue Transformation is to improve the value chain, the efficiency, the viability, and the inclusiveness. There is so much to do in fish value chains. Fisheries, fish in general, are some of the least developed value chains of the food systems that we have. We need to increase returns through less waste, less losses, less discards at sea, opening new markets, and providing less barriers to trade to improve the use that we have of the product. What can be done here? This is really, truly a partnership between public and private, because we need to develop zero waste value chains, circular economy solutions, adding value and developing novel products. For example, as climate change changes the species that arrive to the market, they need to develop those markets. Provide digital solutions that facilitate market access. One of the things that, for example, Oman did really well during the pandemic was to innovate in digital solutions to make sure that the market did not suffer as a result of the fact that people could not go to the markets. We need to reduce barriers to trade, and we need to educate the consumer. Many consumers do not know how good fish is for their diets and how sustainable it can be. And we need to include aquatic foods in food security strategies of countries. Many of them, as I mentioned, do not yet understand the potential of aquatic foods. Now, there are calculations of the benefit of action. We have modeled how much can we achieve if we fully transform aquatic foods as to the three principles of Blue Transformation. And the model tells us that if we achieve the full transformation agenda, by 2050 we can raise global food consumption of fish products to 25.6 kilograms per person per year. This is 25% more than we currently consume, despite the fact that by 2050 we will be 10 billion people as opposed to 7.5 billion today. So the potential is there. But if we fail to transform, we estimate that the consumption per capita will decrease to about 18.5 kilograms, and that will put an enormous pressure on land-based food production systems, because after all, the food systems are all connected. If we do not provide a solution in aquatic systems, then we will have to find the solution from dry systems, from land systems. Blue Transformation provides a new narrative for fisheries and aquaculture, and I would like those of you that feel compelled and convinced by my words, that convince your countries to follow this agenda. We are entering a very important decade. We start with the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture, which my colleague Carolina Carranza will speak to in a moment. it's also the beginning of a decade of action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And at the same time, we have a decade of ocean science for sustainable development starting, and a decade of ecosystem restoration. So the UN has set up the framework for us to transform food systems, and in particular, aquatic food systems. We can do it if we work together. Thank you very much.